I'm going to do, I've decided, is to stop being riddled with self-doubt. And if it's a topic to me,
Yes.
then pursue that, because it's what I feel strongly about in my heart.
Hero's journey is all about living a life worth writing about. Have you ever wished to write your own memoir? If so, make sure you tune in and watch today's episode, as I'm going to speak to a very special guest on what it takes to live a life worth writing about and the process of writing a memoir. Hi, and welcome to Live Your Hero's Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Pheh Sze. I've lived through multiple heroes' journey as a pharmacist, a founder of a social network for foodies, an author of philosophical book, a speaker, and also a coach. I also write the Monday Motivation newsletter, which you can subscribe for your weekly dose of inspiration and practical wisdom. And I'll put all the description in the links below. So today I'm very excited to speak to this guest. She has just written a new memoir which documents her life for 4 years that she lived in Yangon, Myanmar, which is quite a politically country in turmoil. So I'm really curious to know why she made the decision. And she's also a journalist, and her articles have been published in many notable publications such as CNN, BBC, GQ, Australian Geographic and also Marie Claire on topics such as lifestyle, technology, and business. Please and help me to welcome the author of the new memoir, Our Home in Myanmar, Jessica Muddit. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So I'm really curious, what is your thought process or decision making when you decided to go to Myanmar? As we know, Myanmar is no more like a politically, turmoil country. So can you just let us know how your hero's journey started?
Yeah, well, I was actually living in Bangladesh, so a neighboring country, but I'd always wanted to visit Myanmar, initially just as a tourist, but that hadn't been possible. And then when there was an opportunity to work at the best known newspaper there, the Myanmar Times, I jumped on the opportunity because I had a mutual friend. But the reason I wanted to go to Myanmar was because it was starting to show signs of opening up to the world. It had been a terrible, brutal dictatorship for 50 years. But the generals were saying, we want to have elections in 2015. They released Aung San Suu Kyi from house arrest the year before. Right. And I thought that would be such an incredibly historic thing to witness. And as a journalist, to be reporting on these kinds of changes was just, I leapt at the chance, and my husband agreed. So we headed off with nothing, really. We had no belongings except our cat.
Wow.
And, we lived with our cat in a hotel for 3 months because when you're on a tourist visa, it's really complicated, but you have to have working permits to rent a house. So we lived a very strange lifestyle for about 3 months. And it took time to kind of settle in.
Right. So how would you say your transformation as a person, say the first year when you arrived in Myanmar and the 4th year when you left, how have you been transformed as a person?
I learned a lot from Myanmar. I mean, when you live in a country that's been through so much, it gave me perspective. I'm a very impatient, flighty person, and I can be demanding, I guess. And I get outraged at any sense of injustice, and then you go to a place where the co-founder of the newspaper where I worked had been in prison. By the time I arrived, for 8 years, he had another 8 years to go, and he was in prison for a retrospective crime. So at the time, his conduct was not illegal, but the military changed the law. So they said, this is now a law. You went to the wrong authority for passing the newspaper's content through the censorship, and he got a 14-year sentence. And he spent 3 years of that in solitary confinement.
Wow.
So he came out from prison I think it was about 6-8 months after I joined the newspaper. And he went back to work the next day. He still was the same, people said to me, the same beautiful person he was when he went in. So you can't not be affected by these kinds of stories. And everybody, almost everybody I interviewed had been to prison and done really, you know, prison is pretty awful in Myanmar. You always get solitary confinement. I mean, it's atrocious. So I got perspective number one. And I also toughened up a little bit because it's not an easy place to live. You often go without electricity. Water supplies are cut almost on a daily basis. Just in your house, you just suddenly don't have water. Interestingly,
all the things we get, all the things we taken for granted in Western world or a developed country.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, I still, and I hope it doesn't wear off, but I'm still grateful for the little things. And you know, a lot of people get really outraged by our politicians in Australia, but I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, they're benevolent. Like, they actually want us to be healthy and educated and have opportunity. I'm like, that's all fine by me. Sure, they're imperfect. And so, especially with COVID, the situation in Myanmar is the military confiscated all the vaccines and used them for themselves. They're not treating people in public hospitals. They turn people away. They have intercepted charities delivering oxygen supplies and stolen it so that the charities can't help the people. So it just completely shifted my life focus. And at the same time, the people of Myanmar are so beautiful. They are so inspiring. Their grace and their ability to forgive. Like, I met people who forgave the people who tortured them. It's just extraordinary. So that's a really, like, I feel so fortunate to have been a part of that, of that society, because that's a real gift, I think, in life to have, you know.
Yeah, it's like you learn by osmosis.
So,
like they say,
I mean, I am still the same impatient person, but I've toned it down a little bit, you know.
No, I get what you're saying. Like, I'm also a type A personality, so I really get it. Like, you know, chop and all that. So I think everybody have the innate quality, but how, you know, we are like a sharp edges, but over time we kind of round it ourselves. But your innate quality is still there, but it's the degree that we learn. And, you know, life is dynamic. You know, we're not the same person, you know, we were yesterday than today, although we still, you know, retain our innate qualities, right? Okay, that's great. So what makes what's the decision or thought process when you thought, oh, this is a story that's worth writing about? What gone through your head?
Well, it's funny, and I've been thinking about it. I'm not sure if I ever truly believed it was a story worth writing about, my own story. I did have to fight off doubt all the way through writing the book, because you know, as I said, I am not a journalist who goes to war zones. This isn't a book about, you know, conflict between the different ethnic groups. I'm not on the front line. It was my experience as an expat living in a country. And yes, I met fascinating people, but was me as the vehicle? Like, was that enough? The whole time I'm like, is this enough? Is this enough? And you don't really know until the book is published. However, as I was writing the last chapter of the book, the coup suddenly took place in Myanmar on the 1st of February. And I had a completely different perspective. I was writing what I thought was an optimistic, kind of lighthearted book about the opening up of Myanmar and what that change was like. But I thought my book is the first of many, many books about the new Myanmar, you know, where KFC comes and Coca-Cola comes back and life is not so difficult. Now I think, gosh, is it actually a history book? It's taken on a new significance that I could never have known it would have. And that has made me rethink my second book, which is simply about me backpacking for a year. And I thought, I've always just thought that is not enough. That is not a book. And now I'm like, with COVID-19, there is no more travel. There is no more travel. So I felt, do you know what? You should write what is important to you, worry about it later, because our life is such that history is changed and it's made, and then suddenly what seems so ordinary, like life in the 1920s, in 2020 is absolutely fascinating because it's not the same anymore. So that's what I'm going to do. I've decided is to stop being riddled with self-doubt, and if it's a topic to me, then pursue that, because it's what I feel strongly about in my heart. And I still think, I know that my second book will probably, this is some eat, pray, love,
right,
memoir,
right.
but I want to record it, so I'm doing it.
Yes. No, I totally get what you're saying. That was my first experience writing my first book too, because I've always also wanted to write a book, but you always think that you need some sort of external validations, like, oh, now you have the authority to write. So it's not until I was met with an accident, it's like, hey, come on, if I want to write a book, who's stopping me, right?
Exactly.
That's why, like, this is what I label them as the inner dragons that you have to slay. And in fact, I think the process of writing the book, like, you become, because you have to conquer all those, like, writing is not the hard part, it's actually conquering all the doubts, the fear that is the hardest. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would. And, also it wasn't just my own self-doubt. I mean, publishers and agents had said to me, you are not enough. You are not, because I self-published my book, and it got, the idea and the book proposal got to an acquisitions meeting of a publishing company. So I was really close to getting a publishing deal. But the feedback that came back is, you are not famous. Myanmar is not in the news enough. And see, look, that changed. And it just won't sell, because a memoir needs to be written by someone who's famous, and you don't have enough followers on Twitter and social media. So, I was saying, well, actually, I'm going to do it anyway. And I decided, instead of getting another 10 more rejections, just go and do it. And again, I'm glad I did, because if I was to write the book now, if I'd been delayed in trying to get a deal, I wouldn't write the same book, because Myanmar's changed. So it wouldn't be as hopeful a book. But, when you self-publish, there's a huge amount of self-doubt, which is no publishing company was willing to back me, so.
No, good on you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it feels nice when a reader, someone I don't know writes on Amazon, I got a lot out of this book, I didn't know anything about Myanmar. You do feel validated by that kind of thing. But I certainly wouldn't say that, like, the doubts have gone or anything like that. It's hard when you're on your own and you're like, trying to tell everyone I've written a book, and you don't have any, I mean, I have a publicist in New Zealand, but it's still not the same,
Yeah, I get what you're saying. So tell me, how long does it take you to write the memoir, and what's your writing process like? For somebody who are thinking of writing a memoir, what do you think are the first step, or what advice would you give, given that you've written one?
For me, it's all about the chapter outlines. I need to know where I'm going. Not everybody is the same, but once my chapter outlines were done, I know the significance of a small event back in chapter 3, because in chapter 8, Obama's going to come back again, so I'm kind of setting things up, and then I know what to exclude to keep the pace going. And then a lot of people, I think I'm quite unusual in this regard, but I write every chapter, and I complete each chapter as I go. I'm not the kind of writer that very quickly completes the first draft and then goes back and re-edits. I am painfully slow on each chapter. So one chapter could take me a month. I think one chapter took me 6 weeks. I mean, I'm a full-time journalist, and so I have to carve out the time where I can. It's not like 6 weeks of full time.
Of course.
But I spend a lot of time until I'm completely happy with each chapter. And then when my first draft is done, it's actually complete and it's ready for the first editor. Right. And then the editor will come to me, and then we'll edit it, together. But the changes are not huge.
Right. Okay. So what would you say in your process of writing the book? What is the biggest challenge that you face?
It's I think what to leave in and what to leave out, like it's a fun challenge. How much of my life am I going to share?
Right. Yeah, it's quite vulnerable, isn't it? When
Yeah,
you write a
yeah.
memoir. Yeah.
Because like if people don't like your memoir, they don't like you because it's
Right.
you. They are reading about you. They are, judging your relationship, your professional conduct. I mean, I got sacked from the Myanmar Times. So,
Right. Right.
it's, but and the feedback that I've got is people have said, you're really honest. One, the Lonely Planet Myanmar author, I did a podcast with him the other day and he said, I do not do your journalism. You are so honest. And I was like, what do you mean?
Right. Right.
I give a lot of myself, but it's funny because I was like, I didn't give everything. I didn't give close to everything. I could have told you so much more.
Right.
But that's my style. And I don't want to give, I want to give enough that I'm comfortable with and that makes it interesting. I feel like I can't hold back because if I'm asking you to read my memoir, I need to give you a piece of my heart,
Of
you know.
course. Of course.
And to be self-deprecating and no, I hate false modesty. I hate the humble brag. So I really try to avoid that. And like I said to my editor, if you find any humble bragging, can you just put a big line through it? Because it drives me insane when other people do it.
Right.
So I didn't want to do that myself. But at the same time, the reader, you need to gain the respect of the reader. Because they don't want to read about someone who's, has no clue or is, on a self-destructive path. So it's sort of the entirety of how you're presenting yourself is something that I reflect on a lot, and which is what I'm doing now, because the book I'm writing now, I was 25 and I was a huge risk taker. So at what point will people turn off? Like yesterday, I had a review on Amazon and the girl said, she's really honest. She seemed to have a great relationship with her husband, but I didn't need to know about all her smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol because it seemed excessive. So I'm like, oh,
right.
I mean, that was my lifestyle as an expat in Asia. Like a lot of people drink and smoke heavily.
Right.
And I did cut that out, but I know that that's not for everyone.
Right. I think when you cut part of yourself out of the memoir, they don't have a full picture, right? That's why it's such a vulnerable thing to write a memoir. And I really admire people who can actually do that, because to expose yourself. And the world is such a harsh place. Like even though you do anything great, there's always some haters as well. So this is a risk you have to take, or the other way is not to show up at all. So the choice is.
That's the choice. I mean, this for me, this is a long-term vocation. Hopefully, I have ideas for 2 more books. So I just have to be myself. And in the beginning, like the first drafts of my book were terrible because it was not me. I was trying way too hard. And I was also writing in a way that was like really aloof, as if like I didn't really care.
Right.
And surprise, surprise, I didn't get a publishing deal with it. I think this is a much better book, but by the time it was a much better book, I was too impatient to get a publisher. I was like, I want it published now. So, and my plan though is for my next book is to have it published with a traditional publisher. And my hope is that it's easier because I've already published 1 book.
Yes. I think that the main ticket, it's just to start from somewhere, because by the time you wait till you're perfect or in your own assumption that I'm ready, you're never ever going to be ready. Do something first and make it better for the next you learn, and then do the next one and next iterate after that.
Well, I see this book as my internship book. So I wanted to be a journalist so much. I qualified in London with the National Council. I learnt shorthand. I was an accredited newspaper journalist, and I just couldn't get a job, not a paid job. I got internship after internship. Right. So I ended up making quite the desperate move as I moved to Bangladesh and I did a 6-month internship. And by the time I finished that internship, I had a full-time job at another newspaper in Bangladesh. My plan had been to move back to London. I thought, armed with 6 months full-time experience, someone will give me a job. I ended up staying in Asia, and I'm so glad that I did. But I had to be an intern, and I was like 28 years old when I was an intern, you know. So with this book, I'm like, okay, you're an intern again, but you're going to actually get experience. And then I hope for the rest of my life to have a publisher and go down that channel. But I just couldn't take no for an answer. Like I had to get the book out.
Right. That's great. No, good on you to have the courage
Fingers crossed.
to do it. So let me see. What is the main takeaway that you want people to get from the book, or what does this book appeal to? Who are your audience?
Well, I mean, again, I thought a lot of people that like my main audience would be tourists to Myanmar. Tourism has sadly shut down because of COVID and because of the military returning. It's, you know, it's Yangon has become like a war zone. So it's almost kind of a piece of nostalgia. So people who, you know, who did travel, but, you know, no one's traveling. So I hope the message for the book, from the book, is what Myanmar can be, which is an incredible country that was capable of so much, and it really had a bright future. It's a very difficult journey economically after 50 years of isolation, and the military really mismanaged the economy. So, you know, there was such a long way to go. I'm worried about, even if democracy is restored, that the setback will be immense for Myanmar. Everyone's going to have to build back up, and all these amazing partnerships that were formed have been smashed to smithereens because all the expat community have evacuated, basically. So I hope that for future generations of Burmese, that it's just a record of the 10 years, like it was a 10-year experiment, people are calling it, with democracy, but also a hopeful book that there's no reason why, if the military can be booted out again, that Myanmar can just get back on the path that it was, and embrace the changes, all the positive changes that were occurring. And that was society as a whole that was doing that in such a beautiful way. And there was so much healing that needed to happen, but people wanted to move on. People were not, sometimes people have vendettas and they avenge the death of their parents or their loved ones, but Burmese people are not like that. So I really hope that democracy is restored, and then there's more books just like mine that come out.
Okay, great. And where can they find the book?
Well, you can get my book in a lot of places. It's at Dimmicks Readings. Like, I have a distributor in Australia, so it's in all the bookstores. You can get it online from Booktopia and Amazon. I also recorded the audio book if you prefer audio. So it's just, if you just you know, plug in Our Home in Myanmar into Google, it will come up with, you know, your preferred retailers.
Right. Okay, cool. I'll put the description in the links below as well.
Okay.
All right. So before we end, I've just got a few rapid fire questions.
Okay.
The first one is, the hero or heroes in my life is or are?
From a literary point of view, it would be George Orwell, because I think he's the best writer I've ever read, and he's written about Myanmar as well. So I just love his books. I just, you know, everyone, we always try to emulate someone else, but his quote about, you know, good prose is as clear as a window pane. I just love that. And I'm always just trying to simplify. He also has a beautiful magic to his writing that I don't have, but I just try to be simple and straightforward like George Orwell, easy to understand. My parents also, because they're really good people. My dad had quite a difficult childhood, but he did not ever seek retribution or anything, and he just gave us such a beautiful upbringing. And my mum as well is like, always answers the phone whenever I call. Like, she's always listening to me, and like, you know, she's my go-to person when I have a crisis or a small problem. And she's always like, it was fine, you didn't sound bad, but also very honest. So I don't feel that she's like bigging me up falsely.
Yes.
And I mean, I think also like, in terms of like women leaders in the world, it's funny, you know, Angela Merkel, I have a lot of respect for. Like the generations of today, she's done 16 years and she's so steady. You know, I admire that. I'm not like that. And she's going out, like my hat goes off to her. She's going out.
In the supermarket, I saw her somewhere in the post, like she's just standing in line in a supermarket like everybody.
Yeah. I saw that. She has not let this get to her head. She does not seem like a power tripper. And she's so popular. She could just keep winning elections, but she's going out on a high. Like she's more popular than any of the other people who are now, you know, competing for who's going to be the next chancellor. I think she's pretty cool.
What do you think? What's a common denominator or the characteristics of your heroes, you think? You think that's
I think someone who rises above their circumstances, to me, that makes for a hero, because you can be dragged down and everything can be, you know, not your fault. You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it because everything was too hard, or you can rise above. And that's what I admire in people.
Okay. Yes, that's great. And what's the most surprising thing that you learned about yourself living abroad, or what you're,
I think it's funny because I'm not an organized person, and maybe, I mean, I'm 40 now, but now I'm quite organized and I like my routine and I like things set up a week in advance. I don't like pantsing it anymore. And I feel like living abroad, like in Myanmar, you plan for the unexpected and then something different unexpected happened and you still, you know, could not plan for it. But it made me realize the value of planning, because things do happen all the time. So that's, you know, and again, it may be a maturity thing, but the way that I conduct myself professionally has changed as a result of living in places that can be quite chaotic. You know, there's no sort of 9 to 5, shall we say. I never had that lifestyle. So now to make things work, I build in that extra time.
Okay, that's great. Why do you think that everyone should write a memoir? Let's put a case here.
Do I think that everyone should write a memoir?
I put a case here. Why everybody should write a memoir? Why do you think that's the case?
Well, because you change as a person. And so if you write a memoir as opposed to getting to the end of your life and writing your autobiography from the point where you are this sort of mature, enlightened human being, it's quite fun with the memoir. I mean, I have changed so much. Like, I'm a parent now. I have not had a hangover in I don't know how long. I don't smoke. You know, I have kids. I go to bed early. This is not the person in the book that you will read about. You know, I almost feel like I should put a disclaimer at the back. I have changed. You know, so, but it's fun. Like I'm sure when I read back on this book, say in 10 or 15 years, I'll be like, whoa, you know, I was fully wild. So I think if you write a memoir, you kind of freeze that part of your life. You get it down, you know, you focus on a few years, 5 years or whatever, and then you forever have it the way that you wrote it. Because you're not going to, if you wait until the end of your life, you're not going to write it in the same way, you know, and your recollections won't be as vivid. So if you get it down now, you have it'll be fun to look back on.
Right. Yeah. I've actually written like I put bullet points, and in a way it makes me more conscious about the life that I want to create, because if I'm going to write a memoir, I better live a life that's worth writing about, right? So it kind of put you in that path as well.
Do everything. I'm the kind of person, I do everything, you know, even when I shouldn't. But I also know that difficulty and sadness and, you know, real sadness actually makes for good writing later. And that is a comfort, because if you have a great, happy life, there's nothing in that to write about. You've got to have some hard lessons. You know, what's that saying? You know, you're either learning or winning. And if you just win all the time, there's not that much introspection. So, you know,
if you don't slay any dragons, you're not a hero, right? The virtue of being a hero is by slaying dragons. Nobody wants to read a story when everything goes well for them, right?
No, and you've just got a taser gun and you know, it's like so easy. There has to be some difficulty and pain.
Yeah.
And also to grow, like, you know, pain is a sign of growth. Like grief is yourself realizing that you have to move on and let go of, you know, whatever it was that was dear to you and move on.
Yeah. And what's the best advice that you ever received or given to people?
The best advice was a line in a movie, and I'm trying to remember who. I think it was no, I can't say with any certainty.
Right. Yep.
But it was, the line in the movie was, know what you want and how to ask for it. And I love that, because sometimes it's so hard to work out, like, what do I want from my life? Often I'm seized with this deep passion. I want to be a journalist. I want to write a book. And then how do I ask for that? How do I get a job? Okay, when do I stop asking for that and just go and make it happen? You know, but in life, with so many things, like professionally, asking for what you want in a not passive aggressive way is such a key skill, right? And I'm still trying to work that one out. Right. But I think being bold enough to ask for what you want, and to ask for it in a way that the answer is going to be yes, makes for a happy life.
Great. That's a great advice. And complete this sentence, I would describe my hero's journey as
overcoming obstacles, not becoming overpowered with bitterness, and still smiling. So even during that journey, even at the most difficult times, right at the most difficult times, still being able to laugh and be like, this is crazy. That to me is good, because for me, you want to be happy. Like we've just got this life. And so even if in the dark times, and even if it's with a black kind of humor, I think that's a wonderful thing. And that's something I admire in other people, because it's that spirit to keep going, and to enjoy yourself, even when other people don't want you to defy them. You know what I mean? Right. So sometimes, like myself, if I'm having a bad day, I'll just be like, this is ridiculous. Like, go to bed, start again. Your stars are not aligned. But when it's really, like I admire sports people when they, like someone like Ash Barty, she's pretty cool. She'll lose a Grand Slam. She'll be like, you know what? I'm just going to keep training tomorrow. And I think, you're amazing. You didn't have a hissy fit. You're so strong in your mind, and you're a professional. And that's the kind of, I want to be like that as well.
That kind of reminds me, because I play tennis, and in Wimbledon, as the players goes out, they put, I think it's a poem, I can't remember the name, treat both triumph and defeat the same, like they're both like imposters, treat those two imposters the same in triumph and defeat. And that's like, that's so
that's amazing,
right?
Yeah, that kind of gave me little shivers.
Yeah, like life, every day is a new opportunity. It just doesn't, as long you're in the game, which means you're alive,
yes,
you can make a change. It's not the end.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a bit somber, but Anne Frank, one of my favorite quotes in the world, and I thought about it during COVID. She said in her diary, I don't think of all the misery, I still see all the beauty that remains. And so she would be looking out from her attic, you know, she observed things like flowers blooming that she could see outside, really small, you know, small acts of beauty between people. And I mean, she was in the worst possible circumstances. And the fact that she could say that, and someone at her age, I think that's so beautiful. So, you know, during the COVID lockdowns, I try to still see all the beauty. And that's, you know, my kids being able to go for a walk, the sun is shining, things like that. And to actively see them and not to dismiss them and only look at, because you could just look at the negative stuff at the moment, couldn't you? But to try and keep your head above water.
I call them the extraordinary in the ordinary, right? Like before this, we always live for the highlights of our life, but pandemic, make us focus what is the highlight of our daily life. And
yeah, we've really slowed down. We've gotten back to basics. We've gone back to old-fashioned forms of family fun, and it is enough. It is enough. It's interesting, isn't it? But when the news is really bleak and the numbers just keep going up and people are dying, and like I see people in PPE going into the house next door, and it's like, I'm in a sci-fi movie. Okay, what else is around that isn't all scary and dark? And also when you're a parent, like you have to stay happy. I don't want to scare my children,
Yes.
Yeah. So they don't know that there's a global pandemic on, and I'm not telling them. I'll tell them later when they're older, when it's over.
You can read in the history book.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Jessica. So my main takeaway from our conversation today is that it's so great that you don't wait for the external world to say yes, go and publish your book, and you just go for it. And I really commend you for that. And that took a lot of courage. I know that from even just writing like my own little book or whatever, and to write a memoir, which is really raw, you just kind of open up and for the world to see, and that takes a lot of courage. So thank you for writing the book. And as you said, there's more to come, and look forward to that.
Yeah. More to come.
Well done. And you're a courageous woman. And as you said, it's not what you have gone through that define you. And
I'll keep growing. Yes. I'm sure. I hope.
You will. Thank you for joining me today. So anything else you want to tell the audience? Where is the best place they can find you, or do you write any blogs, or what's the best place to find you?
Yeah, just my website, and that has my blog. It's all in one. And you can buy signed copies of the book, which is jessicamuddit.com.
Great, thank you. So thank you for joining me today, everybody. I hope you get a great insight on what it takes to live a life worth writing about, how to raise the occasion. Don't wait for the world to say yes to you. Say yes to yourself first, and take the courage to just show up. If you want more motivation, you can join my weekly newsletter, Monday Motivation, on my website, which I'll put at the link below. And until the next episode, live a life worth writing about. I'll see you soon.